Hi guys, it's Lauren from the Millennial Legacy. So I decided to redo the third video. I recorded the first one last night and I just didn't really like it, so I wanted to redo it. It's why I look different, I'm dressed differently, and I'm dressed for work right now. Um, so in this video, I'm talking about the ego and the part of our consciousness that interacts with our physical environment is the ego. The ego is basically a defense mechanism. It serves to protect us. That's what its function is. However, in doing so, it actually holds us back quite a bit. It keeps us from remembering our true spiritual nature and the fact that we are all powerful beyond measure. And it also keeps us from remembering the fact that we are creating our reality and creating the world that we live in. See, we think that we are helpless in affecting what is happening in the world and that all power and control lies outside of us. And because we believe this, we willingly give our power away to political leaders, governments, corporations, etc. The truth is, we are all powerful creators, and we have together created this world. See, that power lies within us and within each and every one of us. We all are here for a purpose. We all play a role in this. Nobody is better or more important than anyone else. And when we understand that all the power we'll ever need lies within us, we begin to tap into it. And that's when we really start to change the world. And I want to name just a few people who have done this, who have realized how powerful they can be and have, in fact, changed the world in a really positive way. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, Malala, Mahatma Gandhi, and Nelson Mandela. Those are just a few of the names, all within the last 100 years, who have really made a huge difference in our world. Now, the ego does help us in a lot of ways, okay? We live in a physical world and there's a lot of dangers, so the ego does protect us. But unfortunately, when the ego is left to its own devices, it can be very, very destructive. The ego thinks that if we remember our spiritual roots and how powerful we truly are, then it will be eliminated, which isn't true. The ego is not going to be eliminated. It's just going to be brought into balance with spirit. But the ego is fear-based, and therefore it does whatever it thinks it needs to do to protect us and itself. The neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, are an excellent example of just how destructive the ego can be. I'm going to read some quotes now by Eckhart Tolle where he discusses the ego, because he does a much better job of explaining the ego than I ever could. So here we go. I believe all of these are from his book, A New Earth. It's a really wonderful book, highly recommend it. Most people are so completely identified with the voice in the head, the incessant stream of involuntary and compulsive thinking, and the emotions that accompany it, that we may describe them as being possessed by their mind. As long as you are completely unaware of this, you take the thinker to be who you are. This is the egoic mind. We call it egoic because there is a sense of self, of I, in every thought, every memory, every interpretation, opinion, viewpoint, reaction, emotion. This is unconsciousness, spiritually speaking. Your thinking, the content of your mind, is of course conditioned by the past, your upbringing, culture, family background, and so on. The central core of all your mind activity consists of certain repetitive and persistent thoughts, emotions, and reactive patterns that you identify with most strongly. This entity is the ego itself. In most cases, when you say I, it is the ego speaking, not you. It consists of thought and emotion, of a bundle of memories you identify with as me and my story, of habitual roles you play without knowing it, of collective identifications such as nationality, religion, race, social class, or political allegiance. Thinking, or more precisely identification with thinking, gives rise to and maintains the ego, which in our Western society in particular is out of control. It believes it is real and tries hard to maintain its supremacy. Negative states of mind, such as anger, resentment, fear, envy, and jealousy are products of the ego. When the ego is in control, these states of mind appear to us to be justified and also to be caused by some external factor. Usually another person is blamed for these feelings. Their true cause, however, is not to be found in the content of your life, but in the very structure of the egoic mind. It needs enemies because it defines its identity through separation, and so it emphasizes the otherness of others. For this reason, letting the ego be in control leads ultimately to violence, fighting, and war. This is madness, but the ego doesn't see it that way. Egos only differ on the surface. Deep down, they are all the same. And what way are they the same? They live on identification and separation. When you live through the mind-made self, comprised of thought and emotion, that is the ego, the basis for your identity is precarious because thought and emotion are by their very nature ephemeral, fleeting. So every ego is continuously struggling for survival, trying to protect and enlarge itself. To uphold the I thought, it needs the opposite thought of the other. The conceptual I cannot survive without the conceptual other. The others are most other when I see them as my enemies. At one end of the scale of this unconscious egoic pattern lies the egoic compulsive habit of fault-finding and complaining about others. At the other end of the scale, there is physical violence between individuals and warfare between nations. Okay, that's the end of the Eckhart Tolle quotes. So you can see we all have an ego, but the ego is much stronger in some than it is in others. Anyone with white supremacist views is completely controlled by their ego. They are living in just constant fear. Fear of anyone who doesn't look like them, talk like them, think like them, pray like them. And this is all because they fear losing their power. What they don't realize is that they already have lost their power. Their ego has all of their power. They are like frightened children, totally unaware of the fact that there really isn't anything to be afraid of. We've all said or done something that we're ashamed of. We've said hurtful things, maybe acted in cruel or manipulative ways at times. And in those moments, we were completely under the control of our ego. It was our ego doing it, not us. Because we are not our ego, okay? Our ego is one part of our consciousness, not the whole thing. But it wants us to think that that's all we are. It wants us to think that we're just this body, we're just this mind, and that we are separate from everything else. In reality, we aren't separated from anyone else. In physical form, that's the perception that we have, that's the illusion that we have. But energetically speaking, that's not how things are. We aren't separate from anything. Everything is connected. But the ego wants us to think that we are separate. It wants us to think that others aren't as good as us, or others are trying to hurt us. When we fully identify with our ego, it takes complete control over us. But on a soul level, we are all the same. And I know that there's a lot of people who don't want to hear this right now. And this is where it gets a little controversial probably. But what I'm about to say is 100% true. White supremacists aren't their ego either. Just like us, they are multidimensional beings. And this physical reality that we call the third dimension is just one reality in which our overall soul expresses itself. The ego is just one part of our consciousness. That's it. It's not everything. So I'm going to read a few more quotes here about the ego from Eckhart Tolle. Recognize the ego for what it is. A collective dysfunction, the insanity of the human mind. When you recognize it for what it is, you no longer misperceive it as somebody's identity. Once you see the ego for what it is, it becomes much easier to remain non-reactive toward it. You don't take it personally anymore. There is no complaining, blaming, accusing, or making wrong. Nobody is wrong. It is the ego in some, that's all. Compassion arises when you recognize that all are suffering from the same sickness of the mind, some more acutely than others. You do not fuel the drama anymore. That is part of all egoic relationships. What is the fuel? Reactivity. The ego thrives on it. Resentment is the emotion that goes with complaining and the mental labeling of people and adds even more energy to the ego. Resentment means to feel bitter, indignant, aggrieved, or offended. You resent other people's greed, their dishonesty, their lack of integrity, what they are doing, what they did in the past, what they said, what they failed to do, what they should or shouldn't have done. The ego loves it. Instead of overlooking unconsciousness in others, you make it their identity. Who was doing that? The unconsciousness in you, the ego. A long-standing resentment is called a grievance. To carry a grievance is to be in a permanent state of against. And that is why grievances constitute a significant part of many people's ego. Collective grievances can survive for centuries in the psyche of a nation or tribe and fuel a never-ending cycle of violence. Sound familiar? Another reason why we shouldn't be against something. Okay, when we react to white supremacy in a negative way, we're reacting from our ego. And, for most of us, the ego isn't always 100% of the time in control. Most of the time it is, yes, but not all the time. And its control of us is also not as intense as it is with white supremacists. That's why Eckhart Tolle says that the ego is more acute in some than it is in others. White supremacists, they are deeply, deeply under the control of their ego, which is why they have such hateful and intolerant views and why some of them are completely okay with resorting to violence. Their fear manifests, this deep fear that they have, it manifests as anger, hate, and even extreme violence. At the root of those things is their fear. But let's take a moment right now to just think about how living like that must be. Okay, these people, they really are constantly afraid. They're angry all the time, right? Honestly, they hate themselves. That's really what it comes down to. And they lack compassion and empathy. And they're just so consumed by their hate that some of them are even willing to kill others. I mean, would you want to live like that? Does that sound like a fun, uplifting existence to you? I mean, that sounds horrible to me. And, I'm not saying sympathize with them. Sympathize means that you agree with their ideology. No, their ideology is disgusting. And their behavior and their bigoted beliefs is just absolutely, it's heinous. But what I'm saying here is that we need to be able to see beyond their ego, to see that beneath the hate and intolerance and anger and violence and aggression is a very lost, very confused soul. It's a consciousness that is so divorced from its spiritual roots that it has essentially become a monster. And remember that in our dualistic world, because the third dimension is dualistic, which means that there's good and there's bad, that there's right and there's wrong. So that means that some of us will have to occupy the role of the bad or the villain. And that's what these white supremacists are doing in this lifetime. But we've all been there. We've all had lifetimes where we've been bad people. It's part of how our soul grows. I know that's a lot to understand and that might really upset some of you, but it's true. So I know it's hard to see anyone who expresses such hateful and intolerant views as human, but they are. And remember that some white supremacists, they do change. Not all are totally lost. They lose their way for a while, but then when they realize that they have nothing to be afraid of, and they realize that they don't want to be angry and fearful and, just have this hate all of the time, they gravitate back to their heart. So I guess what I'm saying is that we can disagree with their beliefs, and we should disagree with their beliefs, but we don't have to hate the person. We can counter their fear, which manifests as hate, anger, extreme aggression, with our love, our light, our compassion, and our peace. Love is strength, guys. Okay, love is strength. Being a loving person, not reacting to things that you don't like in an angry way, that takes a tremendous amount of strength. If you don't think that that's true, if you think that people who don't react are just weak, then try not reacting. Seriously, give it a try. Love is the most powerful force in the entire universe. There is nothing that is higher vibrationally than love. So hating Nazis is not going to solve this problem we have. It's just not. You know, that when you hate them, you go down to their level. You're reacting from your ego. And while initially that might be your first response when you see these things or hear these things, you just get really angry and upset. I understand that. I'm the same way. But recognize it, okay? Recognize your feelings. Allow yourself to feel them. Don't judge them. Process them. But you've got to let them go, because when you stay in that low energy, you're not doing us any good. You're contributing more to that negativity. So don't hate Nazis. Look past the ego. Hold your light. Hold your love. Don't react with your ego. Respond from your heart. Okay, thanks a lot for watching. The next video 4, I talk about some ways that we can channel our passion into, you know, positive work that will help the world, help our communities, what have you. All right, so thanks again for watching, guys. Lots of love. Bye.